Dungeon Reaper. A light novel by Bloodmoss. Chapter 15. The Queen's Fall. The group emerged into a wide clearing, and the sight before them stopped them cold. The lair was a grotesque, pulsating structure, its walls formed entirely of webbing that shimmered faintly in the dim light. The towering trees around the clearing were draped in thick strands of silk, their branches bent under the weight of hundreds of egg sacs. Some sacs were still and lifeless, others twitched ominously, as though their inhabitants were eager to be unleashed. Cocooned corpses hung from the canopy like ominous ornaments, their forms contorted in unnatural ways. Cain's breath caught as his eyes locked on the smaller bundles, reminders of the lives they were too late to save. "Keep it together," Penny said, her voice tight. "Focus on the objective." A low, chittering sound echoed through the clearing, reverberating through the webbed walls like a predator's growl. The air itself seemed to tremble, thick with venomous humidity. And then she appeared. The Spider Queen descended from the canopy in one fluid motion, her massive, iridescent legs gleaming like polished obsidian. Her abdomen, swollen with pulsing egg sacs, glowed faintly as if filled with something alive. Multiple eyes glinted with predatory intelligence, and venom dripped from her jagged mandibles, hissing as it struck the ground. "Eyes up," Penny barked. "Elise, burn us some space. Everyone else, you know the plan." Elise stepped forward, her longsword igniting with a roar of flame. She swung it wide, sending a wave of fire through the webs that clung to the ground, clearing an open area for the team to maneuver. The queen screeched, retreating momentarily into the shadows, her massive body blending seamlessly with the webbed walls. "She's hiding," Felix muttered, his eyes scanning the clearing. Cain shifted, gripping scythe tightly in his main hand. The shadowy spirit blade formed in his offhand, curling with a faint hiss. "Not for long," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. The queen reappeared, striking fast and hard. She lunged toward Elise, venom spraying from her fangs as her legs scythed down like bladed weapons. Elise sidestepped, raising her flaming sword to block the attack, but the force drove her back, her boots skidding across the cleared ground. "Felix!" Penny shouted. Felix was already moving, his shadowed form darting along the edges of the clearing. He flanked the queen, striking her rear legs with his sadagarami before melting into the mist again. The queen screeched, spinning to swipe at him, but he was already gone, her fangs snapping at empty air. "Tara, those egg sacs," Penny called. Tara nodded, sprinting toward the webbed walls. A smaller spider scuttled toward her, but she ducked beneath its legs and plunged her daggers into its underbelly without breaking stride. She reached the base of the structure and began slashing through the sacs with ruthless efficiency, her movements calculated and precise. Each sac she destroyed sent a ripple of agitation through the queen, her screeches growing more frantic. Cain moved into position, his kuzarigama replacing the spirit blade as he swung the chain toward the queen's legs. The weighted ball struck one of her joints, forcing her to stagger. He pulled sharply, dragging her slightly off balance. "Elise, now!" Penny shouted. Elise surged forward, her blade blazing as she drove it into the queen's side. The queen's venom sprayed wildly, sizzling against Elise's armor as she twisted the sword and pulled back. The queen roared, rearing up on her hind legs as her massive shadow loomed over the clearing. Cain saw his chance. "Grim!" Penny yelled. He surged forward, swinging the kuzarigama's blade upward. The weapon arced in a deadly curve, slashing through the queen's exposed abdomen. The strike was precise, severing the sacs that pulsed with unborn spiders. Venom and ichor sprayed as the queen let out a shriek that shook the clearing. With a final screech, the spider queen collapsed, her massive legs twitching before falling still. The oppressive weight of the dungeon seemed to lift slightly, though the air remained heavy with the stench of venom and death. The team stood in the aftermath, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. Cain let the kuzarigama evaporate from his grip, his hands trembling. Penny stepped forward, resting a hand on his shoulder. "Well done," she said quietly. "Let's wrap this up." The battle was over, but the air in the clearing remained heavy, thick with the scent of venom and scorched webs. The team gathered at the edge of the battlefield, their exhaustion plain in every movement. Cain stood apart from them, his eyes fixed on the grim aftermath, webs littered with bodies, the faint, sickly glow of lingering souls shimmering in the dim light. Tara approached Cain, her voice low. "It's time. You're ready for this." Cain nodded, his throat tight. He didn't trust himself to speak. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped scythe, the weight of the task ahead bearing down on him. From a short distance away, Penny watched the interaction, her brow furrowing. Her exhaustion was etched into every line of her face, but curiosity flickered in her tired eyes as Tara returned to the group. "What's going on?" Penny asked, her voice soft but edged with the need for answers. "Are you two staying behind to do whatever it is you always do after a run?" Tara shook her head, crossing her arms. "No, Grimm's handling this one alone. He's ready for that." Even through her weariness, Penny couldn't let the comment pass. "I've let it go for a month now," she said, the weight of the day straining her words. "But what is it that you two do after we leave?" Tara sighed, clearly expecting the question. "The story always comes up eventually," she said with a faint smile, her tone patient. Believe it or not, for all his bluster and bravado, Cain Rose is a deeply spiritual man. Penny blinked, her exhaustion momentarily replaced by disbelief. "No way. I'm not buying it." Tara chuckled, shaking her head. "Not joking. It's something we share, actually. That's how we met. After every run, we check the dungeons for the fallen and give them last rites so their spirits can move on to the next life without being bound by this world's unfinished business." Penny stared, astounded. "I would never have guessed. That man holds secrets in his secrets." Tara's smile widened slightly, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It's not something he advertises. But it's part of who he is, and it's important." Penny glanced back at Cain, watching him linger near the edge of the battlefield, his posture heavy with the weight of what was to come. She hesitated, then sighed, turning back to the others. "All right, let's move out. Give him the space he needs." The team gathered their things, their movement subdued as they exited the clearing. The forest seemed quieter now, as if holding its breath in the aftermath of the battle. Cain remained behind, standing amid the carnage. The faint rustle of leaves and the fading footsteps of his team were the only sounds as they disappeared into the fog. Any normal person would feel utterly alone in that moment, surrounded by death and silence in this strange, pocketed existence. But Cain was not alone. He could feel them. The energy of the trapped souls was everywhere, woven into the air, clinging to the walls of webbing, lingering in the faint shimmer of the dungeon's fading light. Their presence was palpable, like distant whispers brushing against his awareness. It wasn't comforting, exactly. It wasn't meant to be. The weight of their existence pressed on him, urging him forward. Cain exhaled slowly, steeling himself. This wasn't solitude. This was his purpose, to complete the work that death cannot. Cain took a steadying breath as he approached the first cocoon. The faint glow of a trapped soul pulsed within, a heartbreaking light in the midst of the grotesque remains. He raised scythe, the blade cutting cleanly through the webbing, revealing the fragile, withered form of what had once been a child. The soul rose gently, its shape innocent and unbroken, almost eager to leave the confines of its earthly remains. The reaping was effortless, too effortless. Cain's chest tightened as he absorbed the soul's energy, the surge of power flooding his veins like a burning river. He felt its strength, its purity, and it made him want to lay down and weep. One by one, he moved through the clearing, harvesting the souls from each cocoon. Some were more intact than others, their light still strong, while others were faint, almost faded. But they all yielded to him with the same quiet submission. By the time he reached the final cocoon, Cain's legs felt weak, and his chest heaved with the weight of the emotions he couldn't contain. He clutched scythe tightly, his knuckles white as tears began to blur his vision. The last soul drifted upward, its light stronger than the others, as though it carried the weight of the 19 children who had come before it. Cain reaped it, the euphoria of power surging through him even as the sadness overwhelmed him. He dropped to his knees, his body trembling as he sobbed into the misty air. From a distance, the team lingered near the forest's edge, the silence between them heavy and fraught with unspoken tension. Penny paced slowly, her arms crossed tightly as she tried to process the events of the day. Tara stood a little apart, her posture calm but watchful, as if standing sentinel. "You're sure he's going to be okay?" Penny finally asked, her voice quiet but edged with concern. Tara nodded, though her gaze didn't waver from the direction of the clearing. "He's stronger than you think," she said softly. And this was something he needed to do. Penny exhaled slowly, glancing over her shoulder toward the distant clearing where Cain remained. "I don't doubt his strength," she murmured. "But that doesn't make this any easier." The forest felt alive with an eerie quiet, the oppressive stillness stretching into minutes that felt like hours. No one dared move closer. Tara wouldn't allow it. And deep down, Penny felt that she wouldn't have wanted to see what was happening anyway. Finally, a faint rustle of movement broke the silence. They turned as Cain emerged from the misty gloom of the clearing. His gait was slow, his shoulders slumped as if he carried the weight of the entire dungeon on his back. His gaunt, white face was streaked with tears that glistened in the dim light, and his hollowed eyes spoke of a pain no words could convey. Penny stopped pacing, frozen by the sight. Tara moved to intercept him, her steps deliberate but measured. She placed a hand on his shoulder briefly, her voice low as she said something only he could hear. Cain nodded, his lips pressed into a thin line, before brushing past her to rejoin the group. Penny met his gaze as he approached. She didn't speak, there were no words that could fit the moment, but her nod carried a silent acknowledgement, respect for the man who had returned to them, burdened but unbroken. As the clearing grew dim and the oppressive air of the dungeon faded, Cain stepped toward Penny, his expression weary but resolute. In his hands were a few small items, a cracked charm bracelet, a scorched notebook, and a tarnished pocket watch. "I found these on what was left," Cain said quietly, his voice thick. "They're not much, but maybe they'll help the families." Penny took the items gingerly, her fingers brushing over the worn surfaces. Her throat tightened as she nodded. "It's more than they had before," she murmured. "Thank you, Grim." He didn't reply, but his somber expression said enough. The team lingered in silence for a moment before Penny cleared her throat. "Let's go. We've done everything we can hear." The van rattled along the uneven road, its usual hum of conversation replaced by an oppressive quiet. The weight of the day hung over the team like a shroud. Cain sat in the back, staring out the window at the passing landscape, his thoughts tangled in the faces of the children he couldn't save. Elise drove with her hands tight on the wheel, her gaze fixed firmly on the road ahead. Felix and Tara sat across from each other, their usual banter replaced by silent contemplation. Even Penny, usually the first to break tension with a dry comment, was uncharacteristically subdued. Finally, Penny broke the silence. "I've been promoted," she said, her voice flat and emotionless. "Class D." The announcement landed like a stone in the stillness. Normally, it would have been met with cheers, jokes, and even a toast back at HQ. But this time, the mood remained heavy. "Congratulations," Elise said quietly, her tone sincere but subdued. "Yeah," Felix added, though his usual humor was absent. "About time." Penny nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Thanks. It doesn't feel like it should, though." Tara glanced up from her seat. "That's because it's not about the title or the rank, Penny. It's about the work that got you here. You've earned it, more than most people ever will." Penny exhaled slowly. "Maybe. But it wasn't just me." She turned slightly to face Tara. "You've been a huge part of this over the past month. The guild owes you more than we can put into words." Tara smirked faintly, though her eyes softened. "The guild owes me nothing. This was about teaching you how to run a team the right way." Her gaze shifted briefly to Cain. "And making sure the next generation knows how to stand when it counts." Cain glanced up at her, but he didn't say anything. Penny leaned back in her seat, her arms crossed. You've more than done your part here. Which is why, officially, I'm releasing you from your duties with Hollow Blade. Tara raised an eyebrow, but didn't respond immediately. Penny continued, you can go back to your regular life, but I have to say, you've made a hell of an impression. And Cain, she glanced back at him, you've more than earned a week off. Train at the new dojo, sleep for 3 days straight, I don't care. You've earned it. Tara chuckled softly. About that? Penny's gaze sharpened. Oh, here we go. Fine, I need something to get my mind off of today's work. What do you need? Tara's tone and expression turned unusually businesslike. I need to requisition Grimm for a month, she said bluntly. Penny raised an eyebrow. Requisition him? For what? Tara folded her arms. Something's come up, and I need him on sabbatical with another guild. It's a small, Class E guild, Blackthorn Vanguard. They're new but scrappy, a lot like Hollow Blade. Cain blinked, caught completely off guard. Wait, what? I didn't agree to this. Penny frowned slightly, weighing the request and completely ignoring Cain. Blackthorn, huh? I heard they had registered with Broad, but I thought they were months away from opening. Why them? They're short-staffed, and their leader is desperate enough to reach out. He's antsy about missing quota on the first month with his new recruits. I'll compensate you fully under requisition rules, Tara said, her tone practical. You'd still have full claim over Grimm when the month is up. Penny tilted her head, considering. Griffin had burned too many bridges during his time as leader, leaving Hollow Blade isolated. Her gut told her this was an opportunity to build a connection that could pay off in the future. You never know when you'll need a favor, she muttered under her breath before nodding. I can agree to terms if I see them, Penny said grudgingly, though her tone softened slightly. But the price won't be cheap. Grimm's turned into a valuable asset, and I'm not in the business of giving away talent for free. Besides, her lips quirked into a sly grin, I don't need them getting attached to him. I'd hate to have to burn down Blackthorn's HQ. I hear they just installed some nice new carpet. Cain blinked, caught completely off guard. Did you hear me? I didn't agree to this. I'm good where I'm at. Penny's gaze snapped to him, the weight of the night's events etched into her face. Her voice, sharp and tinged with frustration, cut through the air of the small van. I don't give a flying fuck where you're good at, Cain. Your work is my jurisdiction. You signed that contract, and if I decide scrubbing toilets at downtown Broad HQ is going to get me a better percentage rate on my aid access, then you will scrub those fucking toilets. Do you understand me? The van suddenly became more silent than it already had been, not seeming possible, the tension hanging thick in the air. Penny took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a moment before exhaling slowly. I'm sorry, she said, her tone softening. We're all emotionally exhausted from this run. I didn't mean to snap. Tara smirked, breaking the tension with a light pat on Cain's shoulder. You'll be fine, kid. Consider it an extended field trip. Penny chuckled weakly, the corners of her lips twitching into a faint smile. She's right. You'll be fine, Grimm. You've handled worse. Cain sighed, his resistance crumbling under the weight of the conversation. All right. I get it. I accept my fate. Penny chuckled, giving Cain a knowing look. Don't worry, Grimm. We both know where your home is. When the van pulled into the guild parking lot, the team unpacked their gear in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The grim weight of the day hung over them like a dark cloud. One by one, they drifted apart, each retreating to their own space to process what had happened. As Cain hefted his bag over his shoulder and turned toward his car, Tara's voice called after him. Grimm. He turned, raising an eyebrow. I'll see you in a couple of days, she said, her tone low but deliberate. I'm expecting an unannounced in-between sometime in the next couple of days, and I'll see you there. It will explain the new orders from the Reapers. Cain nodded, too tired to question it. Got it. Tara's lips quirked into a faint smile, but her eyes carried a weight that Cain couldn't quite place. Get some rest, kid. You'll need it. Cain watched her disappear into the guild's main building before turning and heading off into the night.